Carolina, and today I'm showing you how to make this little pumpkin out of felt. It is a Simplicity pattern, and Simplicity has partnered with Cricut, so the pattern is already in Cricut Design Space. The Cricut machine will do all the cutting, and we'll use the Simplicity pattern to follow along to do all of our sewing. Are you ready? Let's get started. Under categories, I'm going to search for Simplicity, which is down at the bottom, starts with an S. And then I'm going to scroll through Simplicity and find the felt fruit. Now you can also type in the exact fruit that you want right up here in the search bar, but I just want to show you some of the different fruit that is available in Design Space. So we have a banana, strawberry, orange, apple, carrot, tomato, pumpkin, eggplant, squash, eggs, and an egg carton. Today we're going to be making the pumpkin. Go ahead and click on the fruit that you want to make to get started. Here I have the pumpkin. There's a pumpkin assembly PDF that'll give me all the instructions I need in order to make this pumpkin. You can either print that out or you can use the file that's right here on the tablet. You don't have to print it out. You can read it from your tablet. It has the materials to cut out and the instructions on supplies on everything else you need and some basic preparation guidelines as well. So it's right here. You don't need to go into the file to get this information. It shows a price of $0.00 because I've already purchased this file. So I can just go ahead and hit make it and it will take me to the mats. The mats here are my orange mat and my green mat. You'll see that I have a 12 by 24 large orange mat. I'm using the Cricut felt, which comes in 12 by 12 pieces. It doesn't yet come in 12 by 24. So I need to resize this to a 12 by 12. It says change mat size. It could make a non-optimal layout. Do I want to proceed? And yes, I do. So now I can change that 12 by 12 or 12 by 24 to a 12 by 12, and it's going to split the pumpkin pieces into two 12 by 12 inch mats. It gives me a lot of extra felt right here, but I'm not worried about that because I'm going to cut my pumpkin out first, and then with the extra green and orange felt, I can actually cut a carrot from each of these pieces, possibly even 2 carrots from each of these pieces, and I'll get the use out of my felt and it won't be a waste at all. So I can go ahead and hit continue. The materials are limited to felt because we are making felt fruit after all. And I have the washable fabric pen, the fine point blade, and then it says to load my mat, but I don't want to use my fine point blade. I'm going to go to edit tools and hit rotary blade and continue because I'm using my maker. I do want to take advantage of that rotary blade. And now I can go ahead and bring this over to my maker and go ahead and cut out the pieces that I need in order to make my felt pumpkin. I have the PDF for the pumpkin here, as well as a chenille stem, pipe cleaner, and a small pencil. Large pencil would work fine too, as well as all the pieces cut out for my pumpkin. I'm going ahead and remove the other pieces from the mat. Now remember, this extra piece right here, I can actually use this to cut my carrot. So I'm not going to want to throw this away. There's enough room to cut 1, possibly even 2 carrots from this leftover piece of pumpkin, as well as the second piece of pumpkin. So I've got plenty of orange left over to make some carrots to go in my little felt fruit display. I have all my pieces. Remember, the numbered sides are going to be the wrong side of the fabric, and the non-numbered side are going to be the right side of the fabric. This piece is fairly simple to put together. I have my machine threaded with a neutral colored thread. You could use a orange thread if you liked. An orange thread would match perfectly with this, but I'm doing several projects at once, so I just keep a neutral colored thread in my machine. And I'm going to set the leaves aside, as well as the stem. To cut the pumpkin pieces together, do numbered side out, wrong side together, and we're going to stitch from the top all the way down to the bottom using that 1/4 inch seam. I do have my 1/4 inch foot. When you're sewing a curve, it's not difficult. Just pivot your fabric as you're sewing to make it go around that curve. If you ever get to a point where you think you're going to be running off an edge, just lift up your foot, pivot your fabric, and then put your foot back down again, and you'll be right on track. If you want to go ahead and chain piece these, you can a little bit since we're making 2 half sections of our pumpkin. So go ahead and put the second half set together and stitch these. Now chain piecing is where you keep going, you don't break the thread before you go on to the next piece, and it saves you a little bit of time when you're sewing. Now I can go ahead and cut this piece off, and I'm going to add a third piece to this pumpkin half. I've got my circle dot coming up at the top. I'm just gonna fold this out of the way. I can line up this point here and down here at the end. Now I can cut this piece off the top, and I can add a third piece to my other half. I can cut my threads. Now I have my two halves put together. I need to make my stem. This stem is made fairly easily. I'm going to fold this in half to make my little half stem, and then I'm just going to stitch all the way around. And I'm going to make sure to forward stitch and back stitch, especially on this folded piece, because that is a permanent stitch. We don't want that to come out. And this stem is super tiny, so as you're going around that curve, feel free to go up and down as many times as you need to keep that seam allowance. I'm going to go forward and back here at the end as well, even though that's getting stitched in, so there will be something coming over it. We're going to be doing this turn, which is going to be a little tricky, and I want to make sure that I really, really get that to stay in. I'm going to use my turning tool here. Turning the stem may be the trickiest part of making the whole pumpkin, but I'm just twisting and kind of pushing it through now that I've made a little bit of headway getting it across. You could also use some tweezers to pull it through from the inside. Once you get to the halfway point, it'll be much easier because then you can push everything through. So have a little patience. Okay, I've used the end of my skewer to push it all the way through and have my little stem all complete. This is going to get basted, the instructions say, to this top point right here. We're going to do it upside down like this. And basting is a fancy term for temporarily securing into place, usually with thread. However, I'm going to just put a pin in place and pin it down, and that'll save me the time of having to stitch it down. So I have my stem pinned into place, and I'm going to put my two halves together, but I need to make sure that I leave some room for turning. So I need a gap, which is going to give me room to turn this right side out, and it's also going to be the hole that I use to stuff this with in a minute. And the other thing that I want to make sure that I do is that I'm only stitching through the layers that I intend to stitch through. And what I mean by that is it's very easy for you to get this smushed on top of each other and stitch through a bunch of layers instead of just the 2 layers. So that's something that you're going to watch as you stitch all the way around, making sure just to stitch through those 2 layers. And I actually want to start on an end because as I stitch all the way around, when I finish, I'm going to finish a couple inches away from where I started. So making sure to push everything over on one side, that I just have my 2 layers. I'm going to put it under my sewing machine. And making sure that all these points meet up here at the end. Now this is a spot where we could have some gaps or some problems, so I'm going to go ahead and stitch forward and back. I'll lift up my sewing machine. I don't actually need to cut my thread. I just need to get everything over to the other side. Make sure that these points are lined up here. Put everything back under and stitch forward and back as well again. A lot of layers coming up over here. I want everything as smooth and as flat as possible because this is where I'm stitching that stem into place. And you never ever want to stitch into a pin. You never want to stitch over a pin. Stitch up to the pin, move it out of your way. And I'm going to go forward and back a little bit across the top because I want to make sure that stem stays in place. It's likely a spot where if a kid uses this, that the child will be pulling it up by the stem. I'm going to lift up my presser foot, get all the unnecessary layers out of the way. And continue stitching. I do have to leave that gap for turning, so I'm going to go ahead and clip this. I feel like there might be a little bit of a hole here at the bottom, so I'm going to lay my layers as flat as possible and just across the bottom stitch back and forward all the way across, and that'll make sure that there's no hole in the bottom. Now I'm ready to turn this right side out through the hole that I left, and then we can stuff it. That bottom is looking excellent, and that stem is looking super cute at the top. I'm using this Polyfill Silky Soft to stuff my pumpkin. Yes, this is a ton, and I won't need this much. However, you'd be surprised at how much you need to fill a small item, even as small as this. So we'll start with a big handful. This looks like it'll be plenty to fill this up, but I guarantee you we'll need so much more than this. Let me find my hole, and I'll start stuffing. Look how quickly that went in. It's not even a third full. As it gets more and more firm, you're going to want to make sure that you're getting into all of these kind of corners and crevices of the curves and really getting this stuffed through. Work your way from the back of the pumpkin forward towards the hole. That's your goal. That we're stuffing this side first and that we're filling in towards the front as we come forward. It's harder when you're stuffing any item when you've got it stuffed at the front to get back to the back again. So work your way from the back forwards towards your hole. Now that we have our pumpkin fully stuffed, we'll need to stitch this closed with a ladder stitch. A ladder stitch turns out invisible once you've stitched it in, so it's a great way to close a hole on a three-dimensional object like this. I'm going to show you how to do that, so go ahead and grab a needle and thread, and the needle should have orange thread, not a neutral color like we used for the rest of it. We really want this to be hidden when we're done with the seam. So the pumpkin's been fully stuffed, and it's time to stitch this seam closed with a ladder stitch. You'll see that my felt has actually tucked into the inside, a little bit while stuffing, and I want to bring that back to 1/4 inch because it's gone a little bit more, almost like more a 1/2 inch in some spots. So I bring that back to about 1/4 inch and then just finger press that. Then that'll make sure that I have a nice good curve on this end as well. I'm going to start by bringing my thread into the fabric somewhere out here and then bringing it up somewhere close along the seam. This tail of the thread I'm just going to pull until it's hidden, and that way I've got a hidden tail and that tail won't show up anywhere else later. I'm going to start with just 3 stitches in place, and those 3 stitches in place work like a knot to keep the thread in place and it won't move, and I find that 3 stitches is actually better than a knot. Now I'm going to do what I call grabbing a stitch, which means going a stitch forward, and then on the other side grabbing a stitch, so going a stitch forward on this side, and then going to the other side. And with a ladder stitch you want to go exactly across. So I'm coming up. These threads that are left over from my seam that I did with my sewing machine, I can just pull and tuck out of the way. There's no need to cut those. So I'm grabbing on this side and going forward a stitch and pulling back up, and then I want to go exactly across. And I'm doing this on my fold because I know that that fold is my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going exactly across, going in, coming up a stitch further. A stitch is about somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch. And the reason this is called a ladder stitch is because as you stitch, you'll see that these threads form what looks like a ladder across your seam. When you get down to the other end, just keep going a little bit further and tuck any of those loose threads from the seam you sewed on the sewing machine inside, so they're all just tucked away and buried and won't come back. And then you get to the top, you want to do 3 more stitches in place, just little stitches. This is going to act like a knot at the end of our thread to just secure everything in place. You do want to make sure that all your ladder stitches are tight before you do this, of course. Just pull them snug and do your 3 stitches at the end. And now we can bury this thread, or we can just bring it right up here to the top. And we can use this same thread to attach our leaves. Attaching our leaves is fairly simple. If you were doing this for a display, you could hot glue them on, but as long as we have the thread here, we might as well just grab a stitch. After you finish stitching on your leaves, you can go ahead and just bury the thread the same way that you did before. Just pulling this up and giving it a quick snip. And that just buries that thread end so you won't see it anymore. Adding the pipe cleaner is super simple. You're going to just twist it around the stem, just at the base. You can just add a couple twists to make sure it's super tight. There we go. And then we're just going to use our pencil and just roll it around your pencil. To make that fun vine. You can pull it out. You just want to give a tug on your vine just a little bit so you can see that coil. Just repeat with the other side. Your little felt pumpkin is complete. That's how easy it is to make this fun little felt pumpkin. You can make hundreds and be ready for fall. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those below. I do look for those. And if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the little bell so that you're notified whenever I have another crafty video for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.